Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Geospatial. I'm Austin Demar. I'm director of the center, and I couldn't be more excited to host today's event. We got a really special guest scheduled with us for today, Anthony Calamito. Is vice president and co-founder of the company Geos 261, where he and his colleagues work to help organizations perform product market fit analysis and construct go-to-market strategies for optimized for growth. Anthony began his career after graduating, like many of us do, as a geospatial analyst, and then he moved on, filling leadership roles as chief geospatial officer, vice president of product. He's a geospatial evangelist for a number of different companies over the past. But also, Anthony's never forgotten about his relationship with academic communities at universities. He's been an adjunct instructor at George Mason. He's a fellow with the American Geographical Society. And not on his bio that was on the website, but most important of all, he's a very special, important member of the center's advisory board. Or so, and here Anthony leads by example on the board. He's passionate, engaged, constantly full of amazing ideas. We can't really chase them fast enough, probably.
Doesn't mean they're all good ideas.
But it's really exciting. And some of you may remember 4 years or so ago, Anthony gave a talk at a geospatial forum and gave us a really eye-opening inside look at what's going on in the geospatial industry. And if you haven't ever seen that recording, it is recorded. You should check it out. It was a favorite has been a favorite for a long time, and we're excited to hear what you have to say today.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. Well, I hope I can live up to the excitement. So my name's Anthony. I appreciate you all joining me today. I'm a loud Italian from New Jersey. If I'm not loud enough for the folks online, please let somebody know and I'll get mic'd up, but I'm pretty sure we'll be okay. First and foremost, thank you for being here and taking time out. I realize I'm the last thing standing between you and probably beer, so I'll try and be quick. But I think my talk's gonna be a little bit different than most. When John and Ross kind of came to me and said, hey, would you be willing to do another presentation? I said, yeah. I really thought about what I wanted to say. And there were sort of some guidelines that you guys are using to make sure that there's some consistency throughout the presentations, which is great. I think is a wonderful idea. But I wanted to kind of put my own unique little spin on things. And so I kind of thought about, if I get this to work, I kind of thought about what would make the most sense for me to talk about based on my experience, being not just, somebody from industry, but somebody who's sort of seen a lot of stuff. And I thought about two things. Number one, I'm a big proponent of sharing my insight with others. There's no point in learning and not being able to share that learning on. And I very much live by this mantra, right? As iron sharpens iron, so too does one person another. I wanted to kind of give you some insights. And the second thing I wanted to do was basically tell you everything I wish I would have known 20 years ago. Because hopefully you can pick up on that and use it to your advantage in your careers and your experiences going forward. And so today's going to be probably a little bit different than you're used to, but I wanted to share insights that I've gleaned and hopefully you go can learn something as well. I actually used this exact same slide 4 years ago. And amazingly enough, nothing's really changed. Now, part of that has to do with the pandemic, but part of that's because these are long-term broad brush decades that we're looking at in each one of these bubbles. GIS technology really evolved in sort of 4 or 5 big stages, right? Obviously, we're all familiar with the way paper maps transition to digital. A lot of us are then familiar with how digital turns into web mapping and the GIS that we know today. Most of us don't really think about all the technology that's on our phones, right? I mean, when I was in college 20 years ago, right, I had no fathom of an idea that I would literally have Dijkstra's algorithm telling me how to get to Starbucks, right? Like nobody knows that that's there. They just use it to get to Starbucks. But all that information that 20 years ago, we all literally had to figure out by hand is now in the palm of our hand. And I think that's amazing. We also now know that, and many of you in this room are working on this, the value and the change that AR and ML and AI are bringing to the fray and how all that's going to change. All of this really means and really equates to the fact that mapping has become ordinary. And this is a really good thing. I think it's amazing that none of us have to understand GIS to use it, to understand concept geospatial to benefit from it. And this is really going to set the stage for what's going to come. At the end of my presentation, I'll give you some insights about where I think the industry is going, some high areas or high use, high traffic areas for geospatial technology. But it all centers around this fact that geospatial and mapping in general has become ordinary, and that's a very, very good thing. So I kind of want to break the presentation down in 2 acts. Act 1 is really a short history, kind of like, my life, right? But I want to do so with your 2 sort of first topics in mind. The first being how has my career sort of been shaped, and the second being what role did geospatial play in it. In the second act, we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the future and how all that's going to play as we go forward. So to understand me, you got to go all the way back to my education, and I happen to be at Penn State. Loved Penn State for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is it's geographically in a very interesting place. The university itself sits in the very middle of the country. It's in the ridge and valley structure of Pennsylvania, which just happens to be a very interesting place for a geographer. So I got to do a lot of really cool stuff. What most people don't really know is that I actually started as a meteorologist, and I actually did on-camera meteorology work. And I'm embarrassed to see myself 24 years ago, but that's what I looked like. Skinny Italian from New Jersey, who actually talked like a skinny Italian from New Jersey. But that was me. And then I realized that I can't do math. I hit differential equations, thermodynamics, and said, this is not for me. So I switched gears slightly, and I ended up taking a career in climatology and geography instead. The pictures on the right there are from what they called SMEX, the soil moisture experiments in 2002. Along the right-hand side, as we go here, I'm going to put some details about each sort of role that I played. Obviously, being a student, your roles are pretty limited, right? You're doing a lot of classroom instruction. But one of the things I really enjoyed about Penn State, where it is, was the opportunities it afforded to do real outside field work. SMEX, the soil moisture experiments in 2002, was an opportunity to do ground truthing for NASA's AMSR-E and Aqua satellites, which are old news now. But at the time, were pretty cutting edge to do evapotranspiration, soil moisture collection, all those kinds of things. I was the grunt that had to go in the field and actually take soil samples 3 times a day. I would traverse cornfields all day long for 30 days straight and just take soil samples. And every day we'd bring them in and they would ground truth what was being collected from the satellite above. It was hot. I didn't want to be there. I had ticks all over me. It was just the worst. But I learned how to do things the hard way. And that is something that I truly believe has helped me in my career as we go, because the key takeaway from my time as a student was GIS is more than just buttonology. I can't tell you how many kids I've interviewed in my life to come work at a job I was working at where I was a hiring manager of some kind. And they'd say, oh, I know how to do slope and all these things in ArcGIS. I'm like, great. Do you have any idea what that means? Do you have any idea if when you press the slope button and you create an output, if that output's correct? And not many people could, because they didn't truly understand the science behind what was going on. They just knew what button to press. And so I appreciated the fact that I went to a school where I had the opportunity to do field learning and actually learn things the hard way. My coworker at my current job, we've co-founded a company, we'll get to that. He was a Marine, and he went through the Marine Corps Topographic Analysis School. For the first 6 months of his career as a Marine, he would literally sit behind a desk with a stack of books this high. He couldn't touch a computer. They basically said, you're not touching the computer until you get through all those books. And so you learn the hard way, you learn how to do things by hand, then we'll let you use the computer. And so I appreciated the fact that it forced me to learn that. So take time to learn the old-fashioned way. That was sort of the big key that it took from me. There's no substitute for hard work, right? And we like to say in the military community, embrace the suck. It's gonna suck, but if you embrace it and you learn from it, it's something that you can gain and build on going forward. And of course, the value of the spatial approach. I don't have to tell anybody in this room the value of geography and using geography to help get an answer to a question. But for a lot of people, it's still a new concept. While mapping is becoming ordinary, which is great, we've sort of obscured the why behind the scenes. And in some ways that's good. In some ways it's not so good. But being able to understand the geospatial concepts behind it was really interesting. So I graduate college, I get out, I get my first real big boy job. Where do I go? I go to one of those big beltway banks, the big, systems integrators outside of the DC area. I worked for Northrop Grumman. Great company, nothing against the company at all. It was a great first job. It gave me the opportunity to learn what business was really like. For me, it was really a federal systems integrator type job, which meant no 2 days were ever the same. We were building solutions that the government had a problem for, right? We were building software that allowed us to map. In this particular case, you're looking at wireless coverage. I was doing plume modeling in Miami. What happens if somebody sets off a dirty bomb at the Super Bowl? How do you map where the radiation would go or the chemical flow would go? But it was all using GIS to do it. I did about 90% of my job was doing GIS. It was great. Coming out of college with a degree in geography, I got to do all the work. I loved every second of it. I worked exclusively in the Esri product suite, which I didn't realize at the time was actually a negative. I wanted to be able to learn more than just that. But at the time, that was all I did. But the cool thing was I collaborated heavily with system engineers, software engineers, and systems integrators. It opened my eyes to the fact that there's more to work than just typing buttons in GIS, right? I needed to understand how to rebuild and reformat computers. I needed to understand how to write code. All the things that you guys take for granted, but at the time, this was a new concept, right? GIS was still new in these days. And by the way, I was the last class to go through Penn State who learned lithography. If anybody even knows what that is, I'll be impressed. But we literally etched copper, put ink on the copper and pressed it on paper. I don't know why I was the last class, but in 2002 or 3, I was the last class to actually learn it. I was also the last class to use Adobe Illustrator to move labels. We take that for granted nowadays. You can do it in ArcGIS or whatever, QGIS, whatever. We had to literally take a finished image, put it into Adobe Illustrator and move labels. So thank yourself, you don't have to do that anymore. Learning things the hard way, right? I can't share much of the work that I did, unfortunately, at Northrop Grumman, just because it's sensitive in a lot of ways. But the key takeaway that I took from my time there was no one ever got fired for buying Oracle. Has anybody ever heard that before? Basically means sometimes it's good to go with the safe thing. We had a lot of great ideas that as a company that builds solutions that we brought to market. The problem was sometimes even the best solutions are overlooked for ones that are considered safe. Nobody wants to bet their career on a big bet that may end up failing, especially if you're a senior leader who's put 20 years in, you're looking forward to retirement, you make one wrong move and all of a sudden you lose your retirement because they force you to retire early. Unfortunately, sometimes people just take the safe approach and there's nothing you can do about it. Because sometimes no matter what, politics are always at play. And as long as you know that, you can't be caught off guard. Nothing you can do. But the one big thing I took away from Northrop Grumman as well, I had a very terrible manager. One of the worst managers, even today, I've ever had in my life. And I learned that leadership is action, not position. He was basically put into a position because he had been there for 30 years. He was a terrible manager, terrible leader, didn't know how to manage people at all. And I learned at that point that real leadership isn't a position, it's action. And it's something that I kept with me and I've tried to instill as I do and I lead in everything that I do. In 2006, I got the opportunity to work at Esri. I had been giving a presentation for Northrop Grumman. I guess I did well because at the end of the presentation, some guys from Esri came up and said, I want to offer you a job and you're not going to turn it down. And I said, okay, that was bold. But I got to be a lead solution engineer. So the solution engineer team at Esri is a really cool team. They get to do all the demos up on stage. That was me up on stage at the users conference, actually giving presentations. I'd done maybe 3 or 4 of these over the course of my career at Esri. It's really cool. There's about 3 months of work that goes into getting on stage. 3 months of nothing but prepping before they let you go up on stage. So when you see those guys talking up there, guys and gals, just think about that. It's 3 months worth of prep. Obviously, everybody knows who Esri is, largest software company in the world. What's interesting is my role of actually using geospatial technology started to go down. because all I was focused on was supporting sales. I'm gonna go be the person who gives the demo next to the sales guy who's trying to make a sale, right? So I was doing less GIS. I was doing it for a cool company, but I wasn't really learning anything. So I started to say to myself, is this the trajectory I want to take with my career, or do I want to do something slightly different? The one good thing is I did learn a lot about Python and Model Builder. I got to build models because I found that a lot of people who were using the Esri technology could only use it so far. They needed some kind of glue to stopgap to get to a certain point, right? I've got this special type of data. It doesn't work in your system. How do I make it work? Well, you got to do a bunch of conversion. I would argue 85% of any given day was converting data. And again, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. It's the biggest bane of any analyst's existence is ETL, export, transform, load, right? Biggest takeaway I took from my career at Esri, be interested, not interesting. Jack Dangerman said this in a meeting we had with NGA, a big government customer. And right before the meeting, he came in and said, hey, you're all good? You're all ready? We're gonna have this big demo. You're gonna go make me $25 million. Great, awesome. Then he bought us El Pollo Loco for lunch, but that's a whole nother story. But he basically said, be interested, not interesting. And I really thought about that. I'm like, what does he mean? And he's basically saying, look, nobody wants to hear about features and functions. Nobody wants to sit up there and listen to you talk. They want to have a conversation. They want to know that you're interested in what is bothering them. How is it you're going to be able to help them? And so I've always tried to go into a presentation, except ones like this, where the whole point is for me to talk, with a listen mode on, right? I want to be more interested than I am interesting. I want to understand what their needs are more than you want to hear what I have to tell you. And that's something, again, that's stuck with me for my entire career. It's helped make me very successful. But I also learned to take care of the people that take care of you. This is a team game, right? Nobody knows how to do these things on their own. You really need a team around you to be successful. And it meant that if there were opportunities where I had, one of my coworkers with me, maybe they helped me work on a big demo overnight, I'd go buy them a steak dinner, right? For them and their significant other. And it was just, it was money out of my pocket, but I invested in them because they helped me. And so I was helping to take care of the people that took care of me. That again is one of those things that I still do today. I've bought golf clubs for people and, trips for people. And it seems like a very simple thing to do at the time, but it buys you a lot of goodwill with those people going forward. I learned that you really need to ask 3 questions in any engagement. What did you say that you found most valuable? What did I say that I found least valuable? And what did I not say that you wished I had? And typically with those 3 questions, you can be interested, not interesting in any engagement. It's the best thing you want to know, right? How well did I do? And I didn't ask in these questions, what did you find most interesting? I didn't ask, what did you think was the best? Those are objective. I asked you what you found to be most valuable. Because in sales, value is what sells. And we'll get to that later. The very last thing I learned at Esri was change can be scary, but don't let it limit your potential. I left Esri after 6 years. I was on the fast track to senior leadership at Esri. I had the ear of Jack and Jeff and everybody else who was sort of important within the DC office at Esri. I left. And I left because I didn't see any career potential for me. I was going to be that for the rest of my career. I was good at it. I was great at it. But that was all I was ever going to be. And so I left a really comfortable job for something that was a lot less comfortable. And that was effectively being a geospatial intelligence subject matter expert for the government. Can't show you those people's faces. I wish I could. It's not a joke. I literally can't show them. That was me in Afghanistan, Bagram, Afghanistan in 2014. I got to spend 6 years of my life supporting the military in a way in which less than 1% of all the US population gets to support them. I was on the ground deployed, supporting special operations forces. It was the best time of my life. I know it sounds crazy. I spent 6 months of my life in the sandpit, away from everybody, and it was still the best time of my life. I was building solutions, I was coding things, I was finding data sets, I was building products, and I was doing all of it in support of people who really needed it. And so as you can see, my role of geospatial went up. Now I'm doing 95% of my job. I'm doing GIS, actual GIS work. It was everything from GIS administration to educating people on the products that we build. It was applied work. I was actually hands-on keyboard again, building intelligence products. It was great. It was an opportunity of a lifetime. The company itself, however, Apex Expert Solutions, this tiny little consulting company that actually did the work, it was a very small company. And if any of you know anything about startups and small companies, some succeed and some don't. And the downside to doing what effectively was my dream job was I did it for a company that wasn't very stable. Now, this company was lucky. They got bought. They got bought by a company you may have heard of, SAS. But as happens with mergers and acquisitions, a lot of times they buy you, then they snuff you out. And so they bought the technology because it somewhat competed, and they basically got rid of everybody and killed the technology so that it was no longer a competition. But like all my other positions, I learned a lot of useful things. And the first of which was simple things scale, complex things fail. And believe it or not, the person who taught me this was Jack Dangermond's left-hand man, Scott Morehouse, who actually built and engineered pretty much all of our GIS that we know today. Scott Morehouse basically said, the more complex you build something, the more opportunities it has for failure. Just like a lot of people say, old cars are great because they're mechanical. New ones break all the time because they're electronic, right? They're more complex. There's some truth to that. And so I've always tried to live my life by take something simple. You can always scale it up. But the more complex you make it, the more opportunity there is for failure. There's a really interesting accent that kind of stood with me. Doing what you love means you don't ever have to go to work. This is true. It was the best years of my life. I would go back there in a heartbeat. The only thing that stopped me was I got married and had a baby. It's really hard to be deployed all the time when you're married and have a baby. I was getting phone calls at 3 a.m. because something broke and I had to drive to Fort Bragg to go fix it. You do that 2, 3, 4 times, your wife kind of looks at you and goes, why are you still doing this? And so I had no choice. Family over work. And unfortunately, for that, I opted for family, but I'm glad that I did because I love my family and my daughter very much. Remember that your name and your credibility follow you throughout your career. It's very interesting today. So this was back 2012. I was in a meeting last January in DC. Somebody came up to me and said, I know you. I said, really? How do you know? They said, I worked with you down at Bragg. I said, I do not remember you at all. They said, well, you wouldn't know who I am, but I know who you are. And your body of work speaks for itself. And people, have always had really good things to say about it. I didn't know it at the time, but the work that I did for these people made its way around the community. And I'm patting myself on the back. The point is your credibility and your name carry itself throughout your career. And so think about that for everything you do, every action you make, you realize that sticks with you no matter where you go. And going back to the whole be interested, interesting thing, the power of active listening. There really is, in terms of being able to be effective, the best way to do that is to listen and not talk. Sometimes the thing you don't say is the thing that really matters. I had an opportunity after I left Bragg to go work for a new startup called Boundless. This was actually the old OpenGeo, if anybody's familiar with the open source projects, OpenGeo projects. Boundless was a group of venture capitalists got together and said, wouldn't it be cool if we commercialized open source? Wouldn't it be cool? It's great. Brand new idea, right? What if we put commercial support and maintenance on open source software? Could we make money off that? This was super risky, but I decided to do it. They brought me in as their chief geospatial officer. My role was effectively to be an evangelist, do community outreach, teach people the value of open source, teach them why they should do it. What do they stand to gain by leveraging open source as opposed to the safe thing, the Esri's of the world, right? Nobody ever got fired for buying Oracle. So this was a challenge. This picture here, I'm actually part of Location Tech. I was a steering committee member for Location Tech, which was basically an open source foundation devoted to the evangelizing of open source technology, particularly open source geospatial technology. So there was definitely some risk involved here, right? As a VC-backed firm, I did almost no geospatial in this role altogether. And I realized that when you put chief or director in front of your title, you basically don't do anything anymore. All you do is manage people or money. That's pretty much it. And this is where my whole career started to pivot. Now, not a bad thing, but my whole career started to pivot. I no longer got to do anything fun, and I was now in charge of people and money, and I hated it. I hated every second of it. Doesn't mean I didn't learn things, though. This is just a couple cool pictures of things I got to do, obviously the whole trade show circuit. But I got to meet some really awesome people. I got to do work with the UN. This was me at the UN headquarters in front of the big thing at the Security Council that they always brief in front of. So I got to meet some really awesome people. I got to do some really awesome things, and I still learned a lot. The biggest thing I learned is the four most important words in sales are so what, who cares? I don't care if your widget has 37 gigawatts on it. I don't care. So what? What does it mean to me? Most companies who fail because they can't explain so what, who cares? It's a very maybe off-putting example, but if I had cancer and you have the cure for cancer, that's a really important so what. But if you're trying to sell me the next iPhone because it's got a camera that's slightly bigger than the old iPhone, I don't really care. So what, who cares? And so in every engagement I have where I'm trying to convince somebody of something, I make it a point to explain the so what, who cares. That's the only thing that matters. If you can't solicit an emotional response by explaining so what, who cares, you're doomed. Because people don't buy things, they buy solutions. They buy solutions to problems. And if you can prove that your thing is the solution to a problem, you'll get an emotional response all the time. Never underestimate guerrilla tactics. It's worked in wars for centuries because it works. At Boundless, we basically tried to copy everything Esri did, but do it better. And we did it wherever Esri was. So at the Users Conference in San Diego, we would host massive parties. And our VCs would spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars throwing parties. Why? Well, because Esri's already brought 15,000 people to San Diego. I just need to make it interesting for them to show up and hear about me. So we took the advantage of everybody being in a place to go create our own little pop-up headquarters and create our own parties and free booze and free software, and free everything. You get a car and you get a car and you get a car. It was the best guerrilla tactics that we could find. Can't beat them, join them, right? And so I learned the importance of guerrilla tactics and unconventional warfare by working for Boundless. I also learned, and I learned this from somebody who was a Master Sergeant in the Marine Corps, managing relationships are the key to success, both at home and at work, wherever you are. You really have to understand the people that work around you and for you if you have any hope of truly understanding how they tick, right? I made it a point to make sure that my subordinates, I knew their families, I knew their families' names, I knew what kept them up at night. And so we always made it a point to make sure we knew everybody, we knew their families, we knew what problems they had. And if there was anything going on outside of work that we needed to square away, we would square it away. Because then they would be better performers when they got to work. My success, if you will call it that, at Boundless, gave me the Director of Government Program job at Mapbox. No good deed goes unpunished, though. I had absolutely nothing to do with geospatial in this role. At all, zero, none. Because once again, you put director in front of your name, you're in charge of money and people, right? My role at Mapbox was to stand up an entire division of the company that did nothing but cater to the US government. It's great if you are a technology that works in the government's environments, right? Closed systems without internet, special data formats, special security requirements. Mapbox isn't that. It's commercial web-based software. That ain't gonna fly in most of the DoD, right? So I struggled mightily to build a pipeline of repeatable business that would be efficient and effective for the government customers we were going after. I used my experience and my network to try and win business, but that was really as far as I got in terms of geospatial experience. It was just who I knew. Who could I call to potentially want to buy this stuff? Again, got to do some really cool stuff, right? SoftBank, one of the largest VC investment firms in the world, quite literally, was the main investor in Mapbox. We had all sorts of money. We were swimming. Couldn't spend it fast enough. We created an entire new conference called Gov Summit, catered to pushing Mapbox technology into the government. But it didn't really amount to anything because the technology itself wasn't fundamentally ready to work inside of the government. So I struggled in this job. I also learned about hiring and firing. Put director in front of your name. Now all of a sudden you got to be the mean guy too, right? Sucks firing people, telling people you got to go. They can't work for you anymore. What, you weren't good enough. Whatever terminology they tell you, you got to just go with it. It sucks. It's hard. But it's one of those things that helps you grow because you learn the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things. One of the things that I learned from the CEO of Mapbox, Eric Gunderson, was create the problem you want to fix. There were a lot of scenarios in my career where something needed to change. I knew it needed to change. I didn't know how to make that change. Eric came to me one day and he said, dude, just create the problem you want to fix. And he basically said, if there isn't a problem, you're not going to have a solution. So if something's bothering you, if something's holding you up, create the problem and then go find the solution. And until you create the problem, you're never going to get a solution. And in a weird kind of way, Eric was right. So I learned how to manipulate people. How do you manipulate people to create a problem that you already know the answer to, but that you look like a champion for coming to them with the answer when the problem's there? And so that's basically what I wanted to, or what I took away is sometimes you need to facilitate that change. Unfortunately, Mapbox taught me the "what have you done for me lately" mantra. You're only as good as your last win. And remember that. You may be the greatest at the pinnacle of your career at one point. I was pretty much that at Ezra, but I left that. And after that, people said, well, what have you done for me lately? This was a great example of, I got caught by it, right? I couldn't do much at Mapbox, unfortunately. This is a real thing. What have you done for me lately? Keep that in mind as you begin to think about what else you want to do in your career. What you've done in the past doesn't necessarily grant you success in the future. And eventually I had to learn when I needed to cut bait. And so I did. After 2020 pandemic hit, I realized now's the time for me to just cut my losses and move on. But it brought me to Enview, which is a really cool 3D AI company. We basically created, we had a team of PhDs that did nothing but live and breathe AI all day. So much so that they actually created their own AI kernel. So we weren't using TensorFlow or anything off the shelf. They literally created from the ground up their own 3D AI kernel. It was designed to not look at remotely sensed imagery and do AI, because that had weird limitations, right? Regularly sized pixels, everybody had a certain sequence of nearest neighbors it can utilize. Like imagery is great. When you start working in point clouds, it all flows out the window. So they had to create their own 3D AI kernel. We did some really cool stuff. We were able to create all these different products and do all this different analysis, automated ways to do feature classification and vegetation mapping and all these really cool things. Once again, I was doing absolutely nothing geospatial. I was managing a team of folks who built products. We launched all these cool products, which is great. I could tell you how to build go-to-market strategies out the wazoo. But unfortunately, this was another startup, right? Risky. And we learned the hard way that lack of focus kills companies. If you try to do everything, you're going to do nothing well. And, again, piece of advice, right? Focus on the one or two things that you can do really, really well. Stick with that. Be successful. And then, and only then, should you push out and do some other things. 85% of companies fail within the first 3 years. This is a true statistic. I'm not making this up. The best thing you can do is fail fast, validate and pivot. One of the coolest things I learned was the lean product methodology. Anybody ever heard of that? Lean product methodology, you can look it up. It's a well-known methodology for product folks who build and manage products. Basically says validate your learnings. Everybody makes assumptions, right? Well, we're going to build it blue because we think that's what people want. And we're going to put these 5 buttons in it. It's going to do these 3 things. How do you know those are the right things? Well, unless you start having conversations with potential buyers, you'll never actually know the answer to that question. And so validate, fail fast, and pivot. We would literally create this process where we would present customers software that didn't exist yet and say, what do you think of this? How would you change it? Would you buy it? How much would you pay for it? How likely are you to buy it? What if I added these 3 features? How would that change how likely you are to buy it? What would you pay for it then? And so we would go through this iterative process where we'd figure out what it is that was the most valuable to the end buyer. We would let them dictate how much they would pay for it. And now all of a sudden we're getting to a point where what we brought to market was a better fit for the buyers that we were going after. And so this process, lean product methodology, allows you to fail fast, validate, and pivot. I also learned the hard way that VC firms and PE firms will always find a way on top. They're never gonna fail. They're your money bags, right? They're putting money in, they're gonna get their friggin' money out, so you better believe it, regardless of the impact on you or the company. I took a hit leaving this company. I had a ton of stock in this company. Cool thing about VP in front of your name is you typically get equity, right? You're bought into the company. We want you to come here, I'm gonna give you 25% of the company and all the success. Well, when the VCs decide that they want to fire sale your company because they're tired of being investors, and you're not gonna make the money you thought you were gonna make, 25% of nothing is nothing. And unfortunately, that's the hard truth of working for risky startups. Revenue rises all ships, right? Revenue fixes everything. Revenue is the key to success, not just in terms of how well a company succeeds or fails, but revenue gives you the leverage to do what you want to do, right? Look at Mapbox. We had all that VC money. We could throw parties, we could throw events, we create things out of thin air because we had the revenue to do it. When you don't have the revenue, you're very limited in what you can do. Unfortunately, sometimes it bites you in the butt. My last opportunity was to take all 25 years of my knowledge together and realize that I'm tired of working for other people and I want to work for myself. And so my good buddy Brian and I decided in 2022 that we were going to start our own company called Geo261. I told you Brian's a Marine. The O261 in the company name is the MOS, the military occupational specialty for a topographic analyst in the Marine Corps. I'm going to incorporate that into the name. But it's a St. Louis-based company because that's where he lives. And it's a veteran-owned company, so he has to be president and I have to be vice president because he's majority owner, veteran-owned. But what's really cool about this is, again, almost no geospatial, right? But because I'm my own boss, I can pick and choose the things that I do. Awesome. I can pick and choose when I do what I do, which is even more awesome. But what I like is I get to basically take all my years of knowledge and apply that across a lot of different vectors. We do a lot of things like horizon scans. I get to look at technology from all over the world. I get to make relationships with companies that I never knew existed, and then try and cross-pollinate, bring them together, and build better products and better solutions. The biggest lesson I learned here was a VC came to me one day and said, if you ask me for money, I'll probably give you advice. You come to me and say, hey, do you want to buy this thing? I'm going to tell you a million reasons why. No, I'm not going to buy it. It needs to be blue, not green. It's got to have this button, not that button. I'm not going to buy it for whatever reason. But if you come to me and you ask for advice, you get me involved in that process, make me feel like I'm a part of it. Now, all of a sudden, I have a vested interest in whatever it is you have. I'm probably going to end up giving you money. This mantra, it works. I'll go into sales calls now on behalf of a company, and I won't even try and sell them anything. Just be like, hey, look, you're an expert in your field. I just love your insight on something. Working with a company, they're going to bring a product to market. It doesn't exist yet. You can't buy it. So this isn't a sales call. I just want to know if you think it's interesting and what we find most valuable. They get involved. They start telling you what they would really like. You know, it'd be great if it did this. If it incorporated these three things instead, I might actually find it more interesting. All of a sudden, he's going, hey, when is that going to be sold? Because I might want to be an early adopter. This mantra works. If you get people involved early as an early adopter, they typically want to take what you have, mold it to be their own. They get invested and all of a sudden they want to buy. I said this before, most companies fail because they fail to validate that market fit. Goes back to the thing above. If you validate the market fit, you're going to end up getting money. But I've also learned that promoting your personal brand is important. I did something this year for the first time that I'd never done in my life. I did a podcast. Like, this is all the rage, right? Like, I don't do the TikTok thing. I'm too old for that crap. But podcasts are like the new thing. And I thought this was crazy until I did one. And I had so many people come to me on LinkedIn and be like, dude, I saw your podcast. That was awesome. I'm like, had no idea. Investing in your personal brand is important. Promote yourself, promote what you've done. It works. We've now parlayed this one little podcast that we did as like a other duties as assigned thing into a legit podcast series that we're going to be releasing here shortly. It's It's going to be filmed in St. Louis, where our corporate headquarters is. We're bringing a whole bunch of people from across the community to the podcast, and we're gonna push them out as a way to promote ourselves. I'm not saying that as a pitch for you guys to go watch it, because I'll probably sound terrible. You don't want to watch it, but promote your brand. That's the key. You gain success by promoting your brand. And the last thing I'll say, something again that's kind of lived with me throughout my career: become a trusted advisor. I get invited to meetings that I probably shouldn't be in, because I'm going to promise you a no filter response on something. That's my brand. That's who I am. I'm going to tell you how it is, whether you want to hear it or not. And sometimes I'm going to tell you your baby's ugly. But in the end, you're going to appreciate the fact that I told you your baby's ugly, because you're going to learn from it. You're going to take that 25 years of experience, you're going to apply it in a positive way. That has helped my business partner and I be successful and build the career that we've had. So I know this is a little bit different. I know it's not necessarily totally geospatial. I felt it was important to kind of share some of this stuff with you so that you don't make the mistakes I did. I wish somebody told me a lot of these things when I was, 25 years ago, beginning my career. But what I wanted to talk about last was probably the most interesting thing I've done so far, which is become an advisor to the board. When you get to be, a little bit further down in your career, they're going to ask you to just be a part of things. So going back to I got invited to meetings I probably shouldn't be in. A lot of these organizations called me up and said, will you just listen? Will you just come be here and just tell us where we're screwing up? And I've developed relationships with a lot of institutions who just want insider baseball. What do you know that I don't? What are my blind sides that I'm not seeing? Who can you connect me with? What is it that you can do for me that I wouldn't be able to do on my own? This role has been one of the most impactful and appreciative roles that I've had in my entire career. Interestingly enough, my geospatial capability is going up. I'm building geospatial products again. I'm doing analysis on behalf of these companies that don't know how to do it. And I'm doing some really interesting things too. Quick example, and I'm very excited. I was just telling Ross about this earlier. I'm going to Botswana this year, twice. That's awesome. I've never been to Africa. I'm super excited to go. I'm going because I'm teaching folks at the University of Botswana how to use drones and do GIS. We're going to teach them how to do it. Companies are donating the drones are going to stay there, and they're going to be able to do their own capacity planning, their own drone work going forward. The ability to share, going back to the very first slide that I had, my ability to teach these folks how to do things so that they can do it on their own. That's what gets me off. That's what's exciting to me. And that's the kind of work that I love doing as part of all these organizations that I'm now a part of. So what does all this mean? I've given you 25 minutes of me just blabbing about me. Hopefully you've been able to take something away that you'll keep with you and use with you going forward. But what's really interesting is how all this plays into what's coming. I think there's a lot of ordinariness in what we're doing every day. Geography's become ordinary. Everybody's phone now has a map on it. Everybody's using geospatial technology to analyze something that they couldn't before. But there's really several areas that I see for growth going forward. The first is obvious, AI and ML. There's just too much friggin' data for humans to be able to process it all in our mind. It's just a fact. AI and ML will continue to be a very key player in how we analyze this. I know most of the folks in this room know what this stuff is and are actually working with it every day. I applaud you. That's the way to go. This is the future of geography. There's also a lot to be said for a lot of the next gen Earth observation capabilities. We're all familiar with electrical optical imagery, right? We traditionally think of as remote sensing. Obviously, some of you are familiar now with radar and SAR, some of the more active forms of remote sensing. Is anybody here working with RF? Probably not. So RF is another capability that's being used to remotely sense the world. Huge implications for RF. Obviously, for those that are not aware, active sensing allows us to sense 24 hours a day, not just when the sun is up. Active sensing can see through clouds and see through dust and see through smoke, whereas EO can't. So there's lots of advantages to this. The problem is nobody knows what to do with this stuff yet. Literally, it's in the early precipices of how to analyze active sensing to make sense of it and create derivatives and analysis. Hyperspectral data, so moving from 4 and 8 bands to 250 bands, we're just grazing the surface on it. There's a company called Pixel, Pixxel. They're a startup company. They're going to launch a whole fleet of hyperspectral satellites next year Challenge is, they're gonna launch satellites, they're gonna collect data, and they don't know what to do with it, because they haven't figured out how to analyze 250 bands yet. Literally, I mean, you think it's bad when you have 8 bands, the different combinations you can have, try having 250. How do you figure out what band combination gives you the best of anything? So there's a lot of work yet that has to go into that. And the last big focus area that I see across the work I do is natural language discovery. Is anybody here familiar with Dante? Dante project? D-A-N-T-I. I think Dante.ai is the website. Dante is basically the next generation Google for geospatial data. So you're an analyst, I'm an analyst. You search something on arcgis.com or some open source hub for a state and local government or whatever. What do you get back from your search? You get back a piece of data. I search for water, I get back shape files, I get back imagery, I get back whatever. That's great, but now as an analyst, I gotta go take that raw data and I gotta go do something to it to get an answer. What if I really just wanna know what stormwater runoff looks like in Cary? Why can't I just search that and get the actual result back rather than raw data? Well, that's what Dante is. Except Dante takes it to a whole nother level. Let's say I'm a Department of State analyst. I really want to understand the status of famine in Darfur. I could search that as a question, just like I Google search anything else. Except what comes back to me is not a bunch of raster data. I'm getting back actual reports of finished intelligence that tell me what the status of famine is. Oh, and by the way, Dante's smart enough to know that if I'm asking about famine, I'm probably also going to want to know about conflict and haves and have-nots and water resources. And so when it returns the answer to your question, it also returns back the answer to 6 other questions you haven't asked yet, but you probably will. Because those ontologies have been built out to know that if you're asking about this, you probably also want to know this. This idea of natural language search is going to take over geography. And because the way we speak and the way we perceive the world in terms of perspective are very similar and aligned, the two disciplines naturally go together. If you haven't seen Dante, look at it. It has a military slant right now because that's who's funding it. It's getting a lot from the Air Force and stuff like that. But it will have broad-reaching commercial implications very, very soon. I definitely see that as a path forward. Anybody familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? Really? Nobody? 2 people? Gartner, big, technology company who tries to be a think tank for a lot of things. I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, came out with their hype cycle. Basically says whatever it is, whatever the technology is, it goes through the same cycle, no matter what it is. Technology is triggered, all these people get really excited about it until it reaches a peak of inflated expectations, right? And then all of a sudden it drops off. People realize it's not the greatest thing since sliced bread, or at least we don't know how to do anything with it yet. And then it slowly works its way back up as people start to get accustomed to the technology, get used to the technology, and figure out what to actually do. So in my mind, in my world, this is where I would plot those 3 things on the chart. Most people have figured out now that AI and ML is the wave of the future. What they haven't really got into too much is AR and XR, so the reality concept and aspect of all this. XR labs and AR labs are growing in popularity, but again, people don't really know what to do with them yet. Next gen EO is just starting to come up that curve. Active remote sensing has been established now for about 5 years. Most of the satellites that are being launched by SpaceX and different capabilities are now active platform sensors. EO is pretty much a dead technology. And natural language is just getting started. We're just starting to reach the peak of inflated expectations. People are just starting to understand what the art of the possible is. So getting specific, if you were to take those 3 areas of focus, AI, natural language, and next gen EO, these are the industries that I see the most geospatial growth in. Spatial finance, insurance and risk, AEC, which is your construction, your engineering, your architecture, that kind of thing. Mining and mine reclamation is becoming massive problem, cultural issues here, environmental issues here. Precision ag, the largest expenditures I see across companies, John Deere, Monsanto, Bayer, you name it, billions and billions of dollars are going into precision ag. And last is smart buildings and smart cities. But the 2 that I see the most promise in and the most money being spent right now are spatial finance and insurance and risk. World's changing, folks, whether you believe in climate change or not, world's changing. And that has real world implications on people's money. Most popularly, and if you live or are a resident here in North Carolina, you probably saw that they tried to pass a 42% increase in property taxes here. 42%? It's crazy. Why are they doing that? Because they basically had to pay out for all these hurricanes and storms over the last 5 years. There is a real world implication to the climate change, whether you want to believe it or not. Wall Street believes in it, whether they want to admit it or not, whether it's a political hot topic or not. Wall Street is seeing the impact of this. And there is a ton of money and research going into applying geospatial technology to risk and insurance. How do we understand better and more effectively what's at risk? How do we add geospatial as a component to what we traditionally use to understand risk? There's a company I was just talking about earlier. They provide the geospatial data to the largest insurance companies in the world, Travelers and some others. When a hurricane's about to hit North Carolina, the state is obliged to determine the impact that that will have potentially on residents before it even makes landfall. So we know it's going to hit Wilmington, for example. They'll do an impact study. They'll say how many homes are within this area. What is the potential for damage and loss for that particular impact area? And then the insurance companies are obligated by law to go take money out and keep it in reserve to be able to pay out to those folks who've been damaged. They must do this. It's a legal thing that they must do. But for the insurance company, if they guess wrong, if they take out $50 million, hypothetically, and the storm only causes $25 million in damage, that's $25 million that they took out that's not earning interest. That's how insurance companies make money. They take your money and they invest it. So when you take out more money than you need, you're not making any money on it. All of the geospatial science we're seeing now is going into predicting better where damage and impact may occur so that those companies who do insure can take out the right amount of money, not too much. We'll see this grow. That's just one example. Spatial finance, this idea that place affects money. It could be everything from socioeconomic status to insurance rates to real estate values to, this is all obvious stuff, but the financial sector is just catching up. They're just now understanding the impact that geospatial has on what they do. So those are the two areas that I'm seeing the most potential with now. I would encourage you, as you think about research, think about things you want to do, how could you play in those areas? Because I promise you, you will get investment, you will get interest. If you do the thing that I taught you earlier, which is do your validation, get people on the horn, ask them some questions, get them involved so they feel invested. Now all of a sudden they're going to be a buyer later on. Use some of the other tricks I gave you too, right? Get them to understand that you want to be there for part of their journey. Just trying to sell them something with a hard sell, soft sell. Those are opportunities that you'll have. And if you carry that network through your career, you're going to be able to take all those people that you worked with, all the work that you did, all the knowledge that you have, and apply it in a role in industry later on. I keep hearing that there's a STEM problem in America. I vehemently disagree. I don't think there's a STEM problem in America. I think we have a marketing problem. There's a lot of STEM jobs nobody knows about. That's the problem. We do a terrible job at marketing. I'm trying to help fix that by getting involved in K through 12. One of the board advisory roles that I showed you earlier was with a high school called St. John Vianney in St. Louis. With a K through 12 high school. Well, I'm doing that because I want to teach them STEM at that level. I want to replicate that through all the other K through 12 institutions in the St. Louis area. We want to expose younger generations to the types of jobs and careers and research they can do so that when they get to a point where they're working, those are the jobs they're seeking out. The jobs are there. Nobody knows about them. And so exposure and marketing is key. I talked a little bit about capacity building outside the traditional first world. I'm super excited to get involved with Harvard's School of Public Safety and Public Health in some of this work we're doing in South Africa and Botswana to teach them how to do their own work, teach them how to do geospatial. I'm very excited to do that. And I need all of you to help push that narrative. So I don't think we have a STEM problem in America. I just think we have a problem talking about it. And the more we can do to expose folks that those jobs exist, that these are the potential career paths they could be in, that these are the opportunities that they'll see when they get out, that's going to help push that narrative and make them more likely to have those jobs in the future. My parting thought. I believe that geospatial will basically go away. And I say that knowing that that's a little bit controversial. I say that because I think as a complete and separate discipline, it disappears. I think it becomes a horizontal that applies in many different industries. We're already starting to see that. When I was getting out of college, there were GIS analyst roles you could apply to and get a job for. They don't exist anymore. There's basically just, IT administrative roles and analyst roles and financial analyst roles. And if you read those roles, the descriptions have in it, they want some capability and exposure to geospatial technology or geospatial data. It's effectively incorporating geospatial into the traditional jobs and workflows. So personally, while this may scare people, I think it's a good thing. It means that everything that we're doing, all of us in this room, it worked because it's now more a part of our ordinary lives than ever before. All those other industries, AEC, spatial finance. I mean, I never in a million years would have thought that Jim McKelvey, the president of Square, would want to meet with me and talk about mapping, right? No, it has a massive impact on the way in which they divide their interest rates and work with different companies to get their readers out there. There's a million different ways that they can apply geospatial and spatial finance. I just never saw it coming. This is happening, folks. Geospatial is becoming a more ordinary part of our everyday lives than ever before. Last thing I'll leave you with. Because my business partner is a Marine, he literally the other day goes, "Hey man, have you ever seen these?" And I said, "No. If you're an officer in the Marine Corps, you have to memorize these leadership traits. Leadership principles, I should say. What's interesting is they don't really have anything to do with the Marine Corps. It's just how to be a good person. And these are the best 10, 12 rules I've ever seen for just being a good person. Know yourself, seek improvement, be proficient, keep your personnel informed, right? The people around you. Ensure that the task is supervised and accomplished. It's just basic stuff. But when I saw it, I really realized that these are really good guidelines for being a good employee, being a good person, being a good analyst, being a good friend, coworker, father, right? I really truly believe that these are ways that you can guide your professional career and end up on top. You can download these. These are published on the Marine Corps' website. There's nothing special about this, but I just thought it was really interesting that they were able to encapsulate all of that into one sort of doctrine, their leadership principle. So hopefully this has given you some insight into different types of careers you can have. I hope that it's kind of exposed you to a couple things I wished I would have known when I was, 25 years younger. But I'd be happy to talk about any or all of this and answer any questions you guys have. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And we ended right at 4, so we always try to keep the tradition. If you need to go. Otherwise, I know Anthony would enjoy staying around to answer some questions.
Yeah. I'm expanding on what you were talking about with there's like a marketing problem with these GIS careers. What do you think is the best way we can market our skills that we're gaining for industry careers? And how do we find those jobs in those different fields that we may not know exist?
Yeah, it's a good question, a multi-part question. First thing is, how do you market the skills you have? I've become a believer in promoting your own personal brand. I didn't think that there was any value to that. I'm not a social media guy. Like I don't have an Instagram account. I don't have Twitter, TikTok, all this crap. I don't see the value in it. But I learned really quick that if you start to promote what you're doing, people will see it. They'll seek it out eventually. But people don't even know that it's there if you don't promote it. The same thing's true on a corporate level. What we're seeing is that companies who traditionally kept quiet about what they're doing for fear of oversharing and competition are starting to see the value in telling the world what they're doing. So my biggest tip is promote your brand. Whatever it is you're doing, the research you're doing, promote it. Get people involved. Are there ways in which you can promote yourself, whether it's through social media or through more sort of directed formal things like these engagements? Can you make relationships that you can then use to your advantage later on? So that's the first answer, is promote your brand. How do people find out about the jobs? That's the problem, the marketing problem. People don't know that these roles exist. They don't know that geospatial plays a role in finance and construction. So that is a much larger problem that we're not going to solve in this room. But I believe that if each of us takes the time to try and get involved in promoting it, you know, I've chosen to kind of involve myself in K through 12 education to make it more well known. There are all things that we can do to help promote in different areas and in different ways. I think, unfortunately, it's going to take some time, but I just believe that by getting the word out there and making it more well known, it'll become more obvious and it's self-evident going forward. I truly believe that. Did I answer everything?
More or less.
Yes.
So I was on the internet recently and I saw something like geospatial machine learning or something like that. And I noticed all the people on that team, I think with Microsoft, and all the people on that team are more computer scientists rather than geospatial science. And I was just like, I think this should be more of people that are doing the geospatial work rather than people that are like just in the computer science space. But I don't know how do we as students like bring in both our GIS skills and try to incorporate probably like a little part of our machine learning skills to make us more marketable compared to like the typical computer science student.
So interesting anecdote, great question. Did you know that GIS-based job roles are paid 22% less than the same role that doesn't have the word GIS in it? That's new data that's just come out. It's real, I'm not making this up. So think about an IT administrator versus a GIS administrator. The GIS administrator would get paid 22% less than the IT administrator. What they're finding is that the terms geospatial and GIS actually undervalue the role. And so what we're finding on the corporate side is that more companies are getting away from GIS specific roles. And as I said, incorporating the GIS in the larger IT based role. There's better pay, better opportunities. There seems to be more availability of open jobs in that way. Doesn't answer your question. How do we promote what we know about computer science on the geospatial side? I don't know that I have a good answer for that. However, I would suggest that the best way to combat that is to make sure that your resume is tailored to the job that you want. Meaning, if you're trying to go after an IT administrator role, make sure that your resume talks to that and inject parts of geospatial where necessary, as opposed to a GIS-focused resume that injects parts of IT. If you tie what you're trying to go for with your experience better, you probably will end up with a better match than if you were to go the other way. That was very interesting data. I did not realize until enough people came to me and said, where are all the GIS administrator roles going or the GIS analyst roles going? And I said, what are you talking about? And we started to do some research and people have actually found out that they get paid less and they're becoming less and less available because they're undervalued. It's a very interesting find. Yep.
Thanks for sharing your story. So you started out, as an analyst, as a research grunt. How did you gain all of your business acumen along the way? I guess, on the job training or were there specific, how did you learn?
Hard knocks. The School of Hard Knocks. Yeah, I mean, it was all OJT. So I was lucky to have good mentors. I'm a big proponent of mentor-mentee type situations. All of the experience I have, good and bad, came from mentors and OJT. I am probably the least educated person in this room. I'm comfortable saying that. I have a bachelor's degree and that's it. But I have 25 years of experience in the field kind of doing it. And that accounts for a lot. Hitch your horse to somebody that you think is going to be successful and you end up being successful too. That's God's honest truth.
Thanks.
I had a better story. That's it.
Couple questions or like get your thoughts on them. First of all, I think you're spot on the GIS side of things. I'm an agronomist. You're not the least under that would be me. I have a BS in actually natural resources here, back in 20+ years ago. Anyway, I've developed a role more into the precision ag side of things and have found that precision ag jobs, they really don't care about the GIS person. They want to know somebody that has the experience of the farm background. That might shock some folks, but that's just me. That's the industry I see away from a precision ag. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to get out on a tractor and ride around and put in 20 hours of work in the field, but I think exposure to that as much as you can. That's just what I think.
Yeah.
But I was more interested because I think I'm a little bit advanced, just like you are, in the mentorship at high school level.
Mhm.
That's really where I want to get your thoughts more on. How can we get involved in that? Because
Who's we in that scenario?
the average society, but specifically me, how could I do that? Is there resources out there that you know of, that if I went to my kid's high school and said, hey, I'm your test dummy, let me help you maybe apply some of the knowledge that I have. What resources, are there resources out there that I can capture on?
Yeah, so yes, good question, broad question.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if anyone in the room is familiar, but there's now an AP Human Geography course given at the high school level. This is new about 8 years now, 9 years ago now, I kind of started this in earnest. So at the high school level, it becomes a little bit easier now. If you can get the AP Human Geography course as part of the high school curriculum as an offering for kids in high school, that becomes the most obvious way. There's national backing, there's grant funding, there's all these things behind that.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way to kind of start. I would also offer a suggestion that there are some high schools, particularly private
That's actually where I'm focused on.
where they have the ability to be more flexible in their curricula.
Yes, sir.
And that's kind of what we did with St. John Vianney, right? We basically said there was a teacher there who's very forward-thinking, wants to get involved, wants to teach kids opportunity type work as opposed to what's traditional. And he basically got involved and said, I want to create something new from the ground up that involves the students every day. So his curricula involves the kids going out and actually using GPS devices and collecting data. They go out and take weather readings every day. They take soil moisture readings every day. Like they're heavily getting involved because he was able to create a curricula around it. So I think getting involved in that way is good. There is grant money that exists
Yeah.
for K-8.
Yeah.
There's no standard body of knowledge that's been blessed yet for what is acceptable at those grade levels. So that's the challenge.
That's the challenge that I've actually have seen too. Yes.
Don't have an answer for you there. It's being worked.
It's almost like a club type attitude more than a class.
It is.
That's what I was thinking.
AP Human Geography would be the more structured way to do it at the high school.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You have a question online.
Has standard of education been defined at every level other than K through 12? For instance, there are 2 programs in the state of North Carolina that are at the junior community college level. So versus, for instance, the undergraduate level here at a university versus the graduate certificate level, graduate level, PhD level.
There is a geospatial body of knowledge. It's a real thing. You can Google it. The University Consortium on GIS, I think, is the organization that creates it. From grade 9 all the way through the university level, there's a body of knowledge that's considered to be standardized for a minimum basic body of knowledge to accredit a program. Below that, as I was saying before, the K-8, it's still being developed. It doesn't exist yet. So from 9th grade on, the University Consortium in Geospatial or University Consortium in GIS has created this body of knowledge that does exist. It's a great question.
I have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
It's great to hear you talk about exposing K-12 students to geospatial skills concepts, but many of the geospatial companies you mentioned in the talk require subscriptions or payments. How do you incorporate geospatial learning at a young age when much of the technology is locked behind a paywall?
That's a great question. The answer is you're right, however, most of the organizations now, those same companies that have paywalls, you have to pay for their software, have realized the importance of pushing STEM at the lower level and are typically offering for those institutions $0 licenses. In fact, part of my role as an advisor for the center here is to broker those relationships between industry and the university. But it works down even at the high school level too. So they realize the long play. if we invest in the kids now, they're more likely to buy our software when they become professionals in the field. The same reason why Esri's offered their software for free for students forever. Jack knew 40 years ago that if I invest now, those people will be buying my software later on. So it was a long play. BAE's doing it, NV5's doing it, you name it, they're all doing it. So I would offer, if there are relationships that I can help broker, I'm happy to do that. But I would encourage those folks, if there are specific pieces of technology you want, reach out and ask them. They're seeing the value in creating those relationships, and they're typically offering that software at no cost. That's right. Open source is always a good rival.
Yeah, let's thank Anthony, and for, as Andrew said, sharing your story. And, please feel free to stick around and keep chatting. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Thank you. Appreciate it all.